What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tastes Like Music. Jason and Joe here doing an album ranking today. This one, as most will be, I think, from now on, chosen by our patrons over on Patreon. Today, we're ranking the studio albums of Nine Inch Nails. They have one of the more confusing discographies as far as what to count, what not to count. A lot of gray area with their discography. They've got some long EPs, some short LPs, some soundtrack stuff, all kinds of things that we could count, and we're not. So we're just sticking to the basically what is listed as their LPs on Wikipedia, which gives us 11 to rank. I know a lot of people in the comments are going to say you should have counted Broken and further down the spiral, etc., etc. Take your complaints to Trent. Yeah. Okay. 11 records. How much of this have you heard before?
Surprisingly, a lot of these albums. I listened to most of them when they came out, not the early ones, because I was only four when Pretty Hate Machine came out, so I wasn't listening to that. I wasn't really into alternative rock when the Downward Spiral came out, but I've listened to the other ones over time. I've listened to some of the EPs. I really liked what he did with Atticus Ross on the Social Network, his stuff with David Fincher. Bunch of Nine Inch Nails tracks made my top, five songs of the year when we did that series. But no, none of the albums ever made a album of the year list. And it's a weird band. I don't want to give away too much. When I like them, I really like them. And then when I don't like them, I just think they're almost just like unlistenable. So we'll see where these albums land for me, getting them all in a row, all in a short period of time, can be challenging. It's definitely a challenging discography, even without all the EPs and soundtracks and singles and all that jazz. So, but in general, I think they can make some really good music. Whether or not they get that on their discography, we will find out.
Yeah, I think people might be surprised at how much of this I have heard before. Actually, a band I usually try to check out. I kind of lost track a little bit recently with all the ambient ghost stuff. I never really dug into that. The 2018 one, the short one, I forget what it's called at the moment. It's in my notes here. That one I don't even recognize. I don't recall hearing about it being released. I don't recognize the title or the cover or anything about it. So, but I listened to With Teeth when it came out. I listened to Year Zero when it came out. I listened to Hesitation Marks when it came out. I feel like I've probably heard the older stuff at some point. Pretty Hate Machine, Downward Spiral. Yeah, at the very least, I know a lot of those songs. So yeah, a good chunk of this I've heard before. Never a huge fan, but enough of a fan to kind of keep an eye on them, keep an ear on them. So normally when it's 11, we'll just go one by one. We're gonna kind of make an exception here. We're gonna do the bottom three at once, and then we'll go one by one for the top eight. And I think you'll see quickly why we're doing that. You want me to start?
It doesn't matter. We both have the bottom three the same. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. So my 11 is Ghosts 1 through 4 because it's the longest of all the Ghosts. Um, this came out March 2nd, 2008. The first record after leaving Interscope Records. So it was released under Creative Commons license, where they told people to take the tracks and make videos and stuff for them. And that's by far the most interesting thing about it. If you've watched this channel in the past, you already know that I am not a fan of ambient music. It makes me uncomfortable. It makes me anxious. I want it to go somewhere, and it never does. That's a personal taste thing. I just do not like this type of music. I at least think, there is music happening here. It's not just like wind rustling and stuff like that, or like field recording stuff. So I appreciate that. I think I'll go a half star because it is that at least, but it's so long. It just crushed my will to live. Yeah, and then 9 and 10, I have nothing different to say about those. 10 is Ghost 6 and 9 is Ghost 5, based entirely on length. Ghost 5 is 13 minutes shorter than 10. I have no way of talking about them. I can't distinguish between them. They just make me hate life. And It was tough to get through them.
I don't feel quite as bad about them as you do, but there's just not anything to make me ever come back to listen to these ever again. And the Social Network soundtrack, it doesn't have any lyrics either, but it has like a function to it, and you can kind of even in your mind pair it with like certain parts of the movie, and it makes it like tangible as songs. Just the way they release these, the first, we'll talk about Ghosts 1 through 4 first. Disc 1, Ghosts 1 is just one ghosts, two ghosts, three ghosts, four ghosts. There's no, like, not even the names are discernible. And there's nothing that I could tell you about any of the tracks. I was working when I was listening to them, so it wasn't like the most unpleasant listen. If I had to like sit through this without doing anything else, I'd definitely kill myself. But just the fact that I was like doing other things, like it's like this dark ambience, it was kind of uncomfortable and like ominous feeling, but it wasn't just like as torturous an experience as you had with it. But I'm gonna do the same thing, just by length, 1 through 4, 11, go 6, 83 minutes. Yeah, they're really just packing these things in here. The crazy thing is these all got like good reviews too. And it's like, don't you have anything better to do than listen to ambient, just like noodlings for 83 minutes and 10 seconds? But whatever floats your boat, I guess. Chris Norris of Blender, he had a good quote. Nine Inch Nails return with no label oversight, no boundaries, and no tunes. And that's pretty much how I feel about all this. And that's probably the last time we'll ever mention these albums ever again on this channel.
I'm
That's
I,
it.
it's like, why put them out under the Nine Inch Nails name is my biggest question. Just put them out as a Trent Reznor thing. Like this really, I don't know. I don't get it. Number 8 for me is The Slip from 2008. This came out like 2 months after the first Ghost installments. It was originally going to be an EP. It was recorded quickly, like 3 weeks. Uh, Trent described it as garage electronics. The lead single, Discipline, I think is decent, but it feels kind of rushed. It feels to me like, if you look at the history of the band, there's large gaps, sometimes filled in with some EPs and things, but between the studio albums, large gaps, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, 6 years. Then all of a sudden, you get year one in '07, and then the huge ghost thing, and then this, and then quickly the next thing. It's just like it almost feels like, I don't know what happened. The technology got to a point where he was able to like set up a workflow where he could just crank things out quickly without thinking about them. I don't know why this happened, or why the change in philosophy, but suddenly he's just like churning out stuff that feels much less considered. It's not as intricately produced. It's not as good. It's not as deep. It's not as layered. It doesn't sound quite as good. I don't know. I think this record is very poorly paced. It comes to a grinding halt in the back half with a couple like instrumental things, Corona Radiata and The Four of Us Are Dying. Just, I don't know. Being placed like near the end of the record back to back doesn't work for me. I don't know. Not much here that I like. Discipline's the closest thing to like a good Nine Inch Nails song, but even that doesn't really stack up to their best stuff. So 2.5 stars for The Slip.
Right. My number 8, I'm gonna go with Bad Witch, the album in which I did not know existed until we started doing this. Came out in 2018, and apparently it was influenced by Black Star, David Bowie's final album, and yet I never heard it mentioned once by anyone ever. So I was very surprised to see that they had this. And it started, like a couple other albums from Trent. It started out as an EP, and then we just added to it. It's only 30 minutes long, and so it's like half the length, a third of the length of most of these projects. This one is really the first time that like he deviates from that mid 2000s sound, the with teeth, year zero. slip, kind of aggressive alternative into he's bringing in like freeform jazz a little bit. There's a playful weirdness to it, kind of, it is reminiscent of Black Star a little bit. I don't know how much really. I don't know. They kind of sound the same and have the same like ambiance, but songwriting wise, I did not enjoy any of these songs very much. You got some horns bleeding in, but it's not like the alternative style guitars that make them kind of radio friendly at times. Nine Inch Nails can be. This is like freeform, like avant-garde kind of weird stuff. If you're not going to give me melodies or screaming or that heavy industrial, that kind of dark danciness. I don't know. I don't enjoy this direction that Nine Inch Nails and Trent went with this one. So I don't know. This one was the first, and I guess only album where Atticus Ross was an official member of the band. And I like Atticus Ross, but nothing here really doing it for me. So not crazy about Bad Witch. I'm gonna go 2 stars for this one.
Ooh, still down at 2. Bad Witch is my number 7. Pretty much what you said. It's 30 minutes. It was going to be an EP, and then did they add to it? I don't know. Only
Maybe yeah.
it's only 3 minutes longer than the previous EP, so I guess maybe I don't know why they decided to call this an LP versus an EP. I don't know. This one is mostly just Reznor and Ross. A lot of these records have like a expanded personnel list, and this is pretty much all them except for 2 guest vocal appearances, one by Ian Astbury on the first track. And yeah, there's the Black Star connection. You got that like fast, frenetic drumming, kind of like breakbeat type stuff, and horns on a number of tracks. And I don't know, to me, it's interesting. There's some cool ideas, but I think it's pretty light on substance. I don't think the songs are really there on this one. I think you could have taken like the idea of like that Black Star sound, the jazzy elements, and written some good songs and done something with it. But again, it just feels rushed. It's like they're in a race to crank out as many projects as they can, and comes up short. So yeah, 2.5 stars for that as well.
Okay. Number 7 for me, The Slip. So we are right in the same area here. Just a couple albums flip-flopped. Yeah, it was really supposed to be an EP, like you just said, expanded. I do think Discipline was a very good single. I like that song a lot. It's got a nice moodiness to it, strong melody, spooky electronics, a fine groove even. But there's nothing else in that universe really on the rest of the album. 1 Million, the second track after 999,999 is pretty good. Echoplex, I don't mind. Final track, Demon Seed is strongish. We got 12 minutes of instrumentals to even get to the last track, Demon Seed. And it's just not quite worth it. None of these songs do anything different or new than what they already have done before. And even Discipline, as much as I like it, kind of feels like a copy of The Hand That Feeds and sort of that harder alternative sound that Trent came back with in the mid 2000s. I think you already mentioned that Trent described this as garage electronics. And that's kind of what it sounds like. It doesn't sound like there's finished songs, doesn't sound like anything was really well thought out. It just seems like they were just cranking out the material around this time and they had a bunch of tracks and they threw it on an album and but I don't know. Some of these albums just don't make a lot of sense. I mean, it still had Alan Moulder producing and along with Atticus and Trent. So this one gets by on discipline and vibes mostly, and it's 2.5 stars for me.
All right, number 6. I guess this is kind of where you kind of have to start making decisions about what's better than the other ones, I guess. But for me, it's still pretty clear that Year Zero is the weakest of these top six. This is, up to this point, the fastest turnaround for an official studio album that they've had. And I think it kind of shows. Again, not that it's a bad record. I think this one has its moments more so than the stuff we've talked about so far, but it's definitely not as strong as the things that came before. It's not as tightly assembled as With Teeth is. This is a concept record centered around a dystopian future taking place in 2022. Yeah. No Dave Grohl on this one. Dave Grohl plays a bunch on With Teeth. Instead, on this record, you get Josh Freese on 2 tracks, but a whole lot less live drumming on this record. And maybe my biggest complaint about this is how electronic it is. It's a little overly electronic, a little overly glitchy sounding, and that's usually not something that I would prefer, a lot of glitchiness. It's over an hour, like a lot of these records, too long. I don't think there's enough variety here. And I think some of the strongest material, Survivalism and The Good Soldier, happen early in the track listing. For me, it might be their most average album, kind of like the baseline of like what you expect from Nine Inch Nails, but no more. Nothing like that really wows you. And it's kind of like a politically charged record. And I think, the political outrage certainly warranted. And I feel like it's probably a real thing that he was feeling, but I don't know. I think he does feel a little detached from it. I think he delivers kind of internal torment better than this political messaging. So I don't know. Not great, not terrible. 3 stars for Year Zero.
Year Zero, also my number 6, and pretty much agree again. We're just right in sync here. Very front loaded. I like the way it starts. I like hyperpower, like survivalism a good bit. Got that real nice nervous energy. Reznor's, I think he sells the politics angle pretty good because he has that like violence in his vocals. Uh, you really know he's angry, and I think he plays angry real well. But it doesn't totally work throughout the whole album. It's too long. It's 16 tracks. I think everything after capital G is kind of I could probably leave it and be fine with a nice tight 30-minute album, an EP even. I don't know. I mean, it came a year after or 2 years after With Teeth, so it still kind of has that alternative guitar sound, a little louder. It's not mainstream, it's not too far removed from I think what other people were doing around the same time, and it's not too far removed from With Teeth either. And it's just kind of meanders and I don't know, overstuff. It's Nine Inch Nails. It's kind of has the same problems as a lot of the other albums. It just doesn't have as many good songs or interesting moments or new elements that we haven't heard before to make it, a really coherent project. So yeah, 3 stars.
Number 5. I'm sure there's people that there's gonna be someone in the comments that is like defending ghosts and stuff. I won't hear any of that. This is the first, I think, truly maybe potential controversial stance I'm taking here. But my number 5 is The Fragile. I've heard some people say that this is the best or like an obvious winner should be at the top of the list, and I just did not get that at all. So this is 5 years after The Downward Spiral. It's a double album. It's an hour and 45 minutes long. So it's not just a double album. It's like a true 90s double album where both discs are too long. So initially it was met with like kind of mixed reviews, and over the years, I think it's been more and more favorably viewed. But as a listener myself and coming to this with kind of fresh ears, like I guess I'm still in that early phase because to me, this is just like kind of a rehash of sounds we've already heard from Trent Reznor, but with weaker songs, weaker melodies, kind of boring instrumental stretches, and just like an inability to edit himself. And for me, someone who's not like naturally drawn to like this type of sound, the heavier rock, the aggression, the angst that is in Nine Inch Nails. This isn't giving me anything else to latch onto. Where I feel like on the first couple records, there were some really strong tunes, good melodies, really interesting production, great craft and record making, and this just doesn't excite me at all in the ways that those earlier records did. To me, this feels like a little like manufactured angst where I don't know, it felt a little more natural on Downward Spiral. And now it feels like, oh, he created this thing that's became so popular that he's trying to like uphold that sound. This feels to me like, I don't know, just kind of trying to please people and do what is expected to make another Nine Inch Nails record that sounds like what people are expecting. And that may be imagined on my part, but I can't shake the feeling when listening to this that this is just him, trying to maybe play to the label or play to expectations. Yeah, I don't know. I did read that this was intended to like dial back the harshness and explore more ambient textures. And there are moments where you can tell that that's kind of what he's doing. But on a lot of it, it just sounds exactly like a lesser version of Downward Spiral to me. I was bored by most of this record. Um, so yeah, this is 3 stars. In 1999, this doesn't strike me as any more interesting than a host of other like new metal acts. So this is just kind of pretty bland rock to me.
Yeah, it'd be a quadruple album any other decade. Not quite there. I'm not quite there for Fragile. I got one here, number 5, Hesitation Marks from 2013, which I know I had heard before because a bunch of these songs sounded familiar, but it's another one I kind of forgot about its existence, sort of brushed it off in 2013 when we were doing like the Album of the Year series. But I thought it was pretty good. I think I might be higher on it even if I hadn't listened to so much Nine Inch Nails this week. So this is one that I feel like it could jump up to 4 stars at some point. I'm at 3.5 right now. But I like this sound. There's an actual gap between this one and the slip, 5 years-ish. So he actually had time to work on his craft, change up the sound a little bit. I think it's a little mellower, less angry, certainly, than Year Zero or With Teeth. Songs are still pretty bleak, still pretty uncomfortable. And even when Reznor could be singing nursery rhymes and that aggression in his voice is like it's like so coiled and tense. Like even when he's not screaming, he's frightening. He sounds powerful and cruel and menacing. So even with the more mellow, more electronic ambience and textures on here, still just like this close to going off. And along with the electronics, there's a couple more danceable grooves, I think, here. All Time Low has a real nice groove to it. A copy of I got that oscillating synth during the chorus and some chopped vocals, but it still kind of has like this groove to it that you kind of, you get lost in a little bit, which is nice to see. Even with all the twitchiness on Came Back Haunted. Uh, Catchy chorus, probably his catchiest stuff, at least since With Teeth, maybe even longer than that. A song like Everything even it's almost like positive sounding on the verse. He it's I wouldn't say like friendly or like smiley or anything, but it's like a rare moment where he doesn't sound like he wants to like kill someone. Some cool electronic drum hits at the end of the phrases, some nice harmonizing that, he's done stuff like this before, but the way he's weaving it all together felt fresh on this album. The emphasis on maybe some catchy choruses and some strong melodies was a nice change up as well. You have a bunch of guest musicians on this one, which is cool. Pino Palladino, Lindsey Buckingham, Adrian Belew, who he had done stuff with before, but is back here. It just feels new and a little bit exciting even, and it feels like actual songs. So I went 3.5, but it's pretty close to 4. I could probably get to 4 with this one.
So yeah, I think there's a pretty clear step up, I think, for the top four. If you're not a huge Nine Inch Nails fan and you don't need to hear everything that they've ever done, I think you take these four, you get a nice look at all sides of them, and that's really all you need. That's all I need is these four. And my number four is Hesitation Marks. So yeah, after just seemingly vomiting out the last few projects to pretty tepid results, it's nice to have an album that feels like some work went into it. This was the only album that they put out on Columbia, and there's a lot of cool stuff here. A copy of has got a really cool synth part with like programmed beats. It feels a little like early Nine Inch Nails, pretty Hate Machine era. Like you mentioned, Lindsey Buckingham is on this track, copy of as well as two others. The track Into, which is cool. I like what he's doing vocally with some of the harmonies on that track. And also While I'm Still Here, which has this really funky horn outro, which leads into the closing track, Black Noise. It's still very Nine Inch Nails. It's hard to call it like a real departure, but it does feel like an update of the sound. It's a little bit more modern. This is 2013 now. I think you can feel some of like what has happened between the slip and this release, kind of working its way into the sound a bit. It's moodier, more textured, kind of like what he said he was trying to do on the Fragile. I think this is a more successful version of dialing back the harshness, being a little bit more spacious, a little bit more minimal. Everything is a really different track. It's almost the most out of place track in the entire catalog. It's almost like a power pop punk song. It's so different and it sounds so fresh, like suddenly coming out, like trudging through this discography and getting to that song. It was like, whoa, what is this? I do think it's still a little too long. I think it could be tighter, but I think it's one of the most creative and successfully experimental Nine Inch Nails albums. I think doing some cool different stuff here, and it's actually working, and the songs are actually mostly pretty good.
All right, my number 4 started out near the bottom, but second listen, I did like it a good bit more. I don't know if maybe it really is a grower. The Fragile, still at 3.5 stars. I had it like 2 stars at first. I was really just wanting to just die listening to this one. It was so long. Um, but for whatever reason, second time through, it just started to hit me a little bit more. It's an hour, 40 minutes, so long. But I don't know, it just has a really interesting sound. Downward Spiral is so harsh and heavy. And this is heavy kind of in a different way. There's a bunch of um, instrumental tracks kind of connecting things. It's definitely more ambient, definitely more electronic. You still have the hints of the alternative and the goth, and there's a little bit of industrial in there and stuff. But it feels very like turn of the millennium, kind of in the same way that Kid A does for Radiohead with all that noodly electronic stuff. But I think the playing is really good on it. Some really good instrumental stuff. And there's some proper industrial rockers, like We're in This Together, has a good melody and structure. Almost a triumphant chorus, fist in the air kind of stuff. Production, the guitars are a little less of that broken glass, abrasive, distorted nature that they had on Downward Spiral. It's a little smoother. It's definitely noodlier, but you have tracks like The Day That Went Away, which somehow was their highest ever charting song. Went to number 17 on the Billboard charts. Shows how weird 1999 was. Because the song features traditional rock instrumentation, but there's no drums. And there's some like weird avant-garde stuff going on, some buzzing guitars and synths. And it was top 20 hit. Who would imagine? Just Like You Imagine has a cool, just really avant-garde, I guess, jazzy, maybe piano part. But there's a really pretty melody on there and like this pitter patter, little light touch drumming, very yin yang kind of track. Even deeper, kind of appropriates like a pop melody, got some na 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 backing vocals, some orchestration, a nice rising chorus, and yet it's so bleak and strange. Could maybe use some more interesting songs, and it is very long. But I don't know, it's this interesting experience, and I don't know, it just feels important, and I don't know, maybe greater than the sum of its parts, and it has a ton of parts, but I don't know, there's something about it that's sort of beguiling in a really like dark way. So I don't know, I'm gonna have to give it one more chance, maybe to get over the 4-star mark, because it does have my interest peaked a little bit.
All right, my number 3 is the Downward Spiral. 5 years since the debut. You got the broken EP in between there, but you can really tell, I think, from the first record to this one, 89 to 94, just a huge world of difference. The entire musical landscape has changed. So you get this really thematically dark record. I definitely remember not being allowed to listen to this around this time when it came out. I remember people talking about them, hadn't really heard them or didn't really know what they sounded like. I don't remember if it was this record or a different record where they had supposedly recorded it in the uh, mansion where the Tate murders happened. Was that this? That was a whole lore, and yes. So I don't know. They were like in my 10-year-old mind, like the most satanic band that had ever existed. Coming to it now, that all seems pretty ridiculous and blown out of proportion. If I'm comparing this to the first record, I think song for song, I think that the edge goes to Pretty Hate Machine. But what this record does have going for it is the production and the craft of record making, I think, is really elevated here. The arrangements are more elaborate, more thoughtful. I love those big disruptive drum sounds on Piggy, which are played by Trent Reznor, just like come in and just like crush the track that's happening underneath it. Is really cool. The way the tracks kind of bleed together, and you get that kind of like tinkling piano motif that keeps creeping in and connecting tracks together is really well done, and kind of a thoughtful way of tying things together. The sequencing feels super intentional too. You get March of the Pigs, which has a ton of like high-end harshness, this like almost like white noise sitting on top of the track. Not a lot of low-end information happening through sections of that song. And it kind of sets your ears up for when you get to closer and that deep kick drum comes in and that deep synth. And it just suddenly, it's like you're in a different world than you previously were with the other track. And it's almost like he's highlighting closer, like pay attention to this song, especially. It's still a record that I appreciate more than I enjoy. I'm not really into a lot of the harsh like distortion on this record, especially like Big Man with a Gun is so harsh. But then he does, I mean, that is a short song, and then he follows it up with A Warm Place, which um, is basically that. It's kind of like a respite from all the noise that he just had hit you with. So I do think the way it flows and the way it's set up is very thoughtful and very well put together. But in general, if you know this channel, if you know me, my general vibe isn't like the aggressive dark rock stuff. So again, I think the record's very well executed. I think there's a very clear, precise, and like unique artistic vision on display here. Nine Inch Nails were huge at the time, and I think they definitely spoke to a generation. Um, and I think maybe they're not talked enough about in that regard, how kind of huge they were and influential. I think maybe because of just the history of the band and the direction Trent went in, maybe they're not thought of that way anymore as much. But yeah, I mean, they were everywhere, and yeah, this record came out like a month before Kurt died, so it almost like kind of stepped in and filled that void in a way. So 3.5 stars for Downward Spiral for me.
Right. My number 3, I'm gonna go with Teeth is what I'm gonna go with. Number 3. 4 stars for this one. Another big gap. It's 2004, and Nine Inch Nails has only released 4 albums. They started in 1989. Not the most prolific band in the world. And this one, I mean, I think you could say Downward Spiral and Fragile kind of had, I mean, they were sort of connected thematically anyway. So you had the dark Depeche Mode of 89, then you had the dark alternative, dark, whatever you want to call it, of Downward Spiral and Fragile. And now you have sort of them leaning into like that heavy rock sound, 2004 a little bit. I think this is by far the most accessible rock album that they ever did, before and after, really. Reznor was really into analog electronic effects and instruments, specifically tape delay. Modular synthesizers is what I read on Wikipedia. And it kind of makes sense. It's a little less of that ambiance, the darkness of the Fragile. It's a little more immediate. Here's a cool riff. There's some electronics going on, but we're gonna base it off of these riffs and these big choruses. Not really sure how the songwriting process works for Trent there, but it's not like a complete departure. All Love in the World opens with some nice clipping electronics, scattered electronic drums. It's hums and buzzes and creaks. And it's a nice, oppressive, ominous atmosphere like you expect from Nine Inch Nails. But it's got a bit of a triumphant, bright piano line, some really big power chords, some shaker drums, kind of sounds like hand claps, multi-tracked vocals from Reznor. It builds into almost this like gospel-y number in this bridge. Some great harmonizing, really big and beautiful, but with that dark electronic element under everything still. So it's not like a bright new happy trend. It's just sort of using the electronics and the glitchiness and the bleeps and the bloops in a different way. And of course, you have The Hand That Feeds, which is my song of the year in 2005. It's a really uncomplicated song, but it has some killer drumming, a really basic riff, but it's so heavy and repetitive. It just works. The sound of like the fuzzy bass is perfect. And that thick, sticky synth solo, really simple. Again, it just sounds amazing. It's like 4 notes, but just the sound that they get out of it is so cool. Every day is exactly the same. Pretty mainstream sounding industrial song. It's not new metal, but it's pretty, indebted to hard rock. Not too harsh, but there's some good emotion, some good pathos in there. Only is a little funky. It's creepy, but it's also a little funky, and it's got a really catchy drum part to it. It feels just like them meeting, mainstream like halfway a little bit. And of course, it was their worst reviewed album because that's not what critics wanted Nine Inch Nails to do. But I think it was a good direction for them to go, even briefly. Get Dave Grohl on the drum kit and just make a really good, powerful rock record in the 2000s. I think it sounds great, production's great. All the synths and everything sound fantastic. And it's a great marriage of hard rock and that electronic, whatever he calls his music, alternative, industrial, synth pop is what Wikipedia has under it a little bit. So I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's catchy. It's good stuff.
All right, my number 2 is Pretty Hate Machine. So probably the first time I became aware of the term industrial as a genre was in regards to this record. But I still hear a lot of new wave elements. I mean, I think it's very clearly Depeche Mode influenced. And I always knew that. Like, I was always aware that he had kind of like that background. I had seen that like clip of his previous band, Slam Bamboo, several years prior to this. But revisiting this record, I was surprised of how much of that is still left in the sound of this record. Much more so than I kind of had thought. And I think some of the songs here are pretty memorable. Head Like a Hole practically has two choruses. You get the part where he's screaming "Head like a hole, black as your soul," and then you get the bow down before the one you serve line, which is like a separate refrain. Terrible Lie and Down in It, I think, are both really strong melodically as well. This kind of like programming of the drums and the robotic beats, never going to be my favorite thing, but I do think it's done pretty well here. And I think for 1989, I think the sounds have aged pretty well. I really wanted to push this up to my number one. Uh, it's a cooler record than what I do have at number one, Process of Elimination, if you've been paying attention. But for me, it's just too front loaded. I think the first three songs are tremendous. And then after that, it's kind of like more of the same idea, going over the same territory. It's not that exciting, and the songs I don't think are that great. But I will say it might be Trent's best balancing of melodicism, production, and aggression. I think he kind of walks the line of all three of those things pretty well. It's well, blended together. It's never too angry. It's never too melodic. It never turns to pop, and I think the production is solid throughout. I just wish it was a little stronger in the back half. Um, yeah, it would be my easy number one if it had maybe one or two more great songs in the latter half. For me, 3.5 stars for Pretty Hate Machine.
Pretty Hate Machine's my number two. But it is a very cool album for 1989. And one of the most surprising things I think I ever heard, and I don't remember when I heard this, that Head Like a Hole was from 1989, completely blew my mind the first time I heard it. I would have sworn it was like 1994, like at the earliest. Like it sounds so ahead of its time for 1989.
So I think that the first time I ever heard Head Like a Hole, I'm pretty sure was in a Best Buy, and they were playing the video on the TVs. And to me, I assumed it was a new song when I saw that. It couldn't have been in 89 because I would have only been 5 years old. And I don't know if Best Buy even existed in 89. So it must have been around the time of Downward Spiral, I would guess. Uh, but yeah, I found out later that it was actually older. So yeah, it blew my mind also.
Yeah, I'd like to see or hear from anyone who actually would heard that song for the first time and was like, "Oh yeah, that's a 1989 song," because it does not sound like it at all. And it is a hell of a career opening song to have in your discography because it just hits so hard. It's dark and foreboding and angry, super powerful. It's got a great riff underneath it. Some really cool synth and electronic elements. There's like fluttering synths in there, the faraway screams, the spidery drums and percussion. It's just so badass. And like Jason said, it has like two choruses. Like it's all of those things and also incredibly catchy and passes the hum test for sure. And Terrible Lie, also great. Great, amazing chorus. That floating downcast synth line is really beautiful, sad sounding. Uh, love the use of synth and electronics. Trent's got some really abrasive screams on it, but it's another one that has like a really great chorus and it's a really catchy part. And those two songs are definitely the strongest songs on the whole album. And it is a little bit downhill after that. But I think there's some cool stuff on there. It definitely dates itself more. I think those two songs especially could have fit on, 1994, fit on the Downward Spiral easily. The other songs kind of have more of that Depeche Mode, like this is the 80s sound to it. Sanctified kind of has like a Faith No More-y bass line to it. Pretty Depeche Mode-y on the sampling and the popping synth pad stuff. Kind of I Want To feels a bit like a kind of new wave sort of, the synth pop kind of stuff. And it's got a really great bridge. And Reznor sounds like a cross between George Michael and Bono there, like on this just like really just completely shifting change up bridge. And the rest of the song is like really aggressive. So it's just a really interesting sound, the way he uses synths as the driving force. There's some guitars, but they're usually used as like color. They kind of, will be completely absent and then kind of fly in to make some racket and then kind of go away. And yeah, it's a really cool sounding album, very unique, very ahead of its time, but it's just missing a couple more Head Like a Holes and Terrible Lies to make it like a truly great album. It's hard to believe it came out in 1989, but it did, and it would be 5 years before we get another album from him. So you don't get that like Depeche Mode influence ever again. I mean, even though you still get that aggression, if you want this sound, you got to go to Pretty Hate Machine, really.
Ramser's 89 album of the year, I believe.
I believe it was.
Rest in peace again. Uh, Number one for me, With Teeth. I think by 2005, kind of like the novelty and the danger of Nine Inch Nails had kind of worn off a bit. That didn't really carry that mystique anymore of, the shock rock type of thing that they had kind of surrounding them. This was his sobriety record as well. So that played a big part in the making of this record. It feels a little more relaxed. It's a more song focused with, I think, pretty strong songs and almost certainly the best band feel of any Nine Inch Nails record, probably due to Dave Grohl drumming on a good chunk of the record. I like the opener, All the Love in the World. I think that's really cool. I dig the vocal production on that and the programmed beat at the start and how it opens up with the big piano chords and the layered vocal harmonies in the back half of the song. The Collector, the riff to that song, very Queens of the Stone Agey. The Hand That Feeds, I think one of their strongest singles ever. Every Day is Exactly the Same, probably the most successful ballad type of song in their entire catalog. I think that one's pretty strong as well. And the track Only has such a cool riff synth line, which kind of calls back to like the early uh, record, Pretty Hate Machine, kind of, you know, going back to Trent's 80s roots a little with that. And it's got this really cool, almost like spoken word delivery, which is very different. It feels very 90s. It's almost like cakey in a way. And yeah, like you said, I think it's just a really consistent batch of songs. It's pretty engaging and it just feels really natural. It feels honest. It feels like it's coming from a real place rather than like trying to manufacture darkness, which is what Fragile kind of felt like to me. It could still be tightened up a little. It's 56 minutes. So, and I don't think every track is great, but most of it is really good. It's a very high 3.5 for me. I don't get to 4 stars with Nine Inch Nails. So yeah, 4, 3.5. So I think all of those top four are good records, worth checking out, but not a band I love. But yeah.
My number one, The Downward Spiral. I really haven't listened to it that much before. A lot of these albums I've heard, but trying to think if I ever was like, oh God, I gotta listen to that one again. Takes a lot out of you. It's a harrowing experience to say the least. But 5 years after Pretty Hate Machine, we finally get the proper follow-up. It's a new sound. It's got that industrial sound to it, but the Depeche Mode influence is pretty much out of here. You got a lot more guitars. You got a lot more aggression, a lot more claustrophobic sort of atmosphere. It's very dense. The production is just layered and layered and layered. Still got all the synths and electronic elements, but you got the guitars and the bass and the drums. And it's just this heavy listening experience. But I think it's a really unique, interesting album. The way it kind of jerks you around. A song like Mr. Self-Destruct. It just takes Pretty Hate Machine's formula and just amps it up until it's almost a completely different thing. And then it kind of pulls the rug from out from under you. You get that delicate delicate synth line in the break, the whispery vocals. He said it was inspired a lot by Low by David Bowie, The Wall by Pink Floyd, the themes of self-destruction and isolation, the sound of Low and the ambience of it. Got some really cool synth work throughout, but really love the way it sounds on Heresy, that brooding, propulsive sound. You got some little bright spots, like Doesn't It Make You Feel Better part on March of the Pigs. Fun little aside before it like hurdles you back into the whatever the shit. Just the heaviness of it all. Closer is a classic, just an iconic sounding song. It's the perfect mix of that just animal aggression and sort of like poppy nature. Like you can see why it was such a big song. It's almost danceable, but it's also really just crushingly dark until it kind of fades away and that trembling final piano coda comes in. I love the way it kind of crossfades into each other. And You Got Hurt, which just an all-timer song. The way he whispers, the shaky vocals, you feel the hurt in Trent and the hurt in you. And whether you like Johnny Cash's version or Trent's version better, I think it's a perfectly written song. The way it goes from the soft to the heaviness, and just a great song, perfect song. So it has, I don't know, it has like all the elements of the Fragile and all the electronic stuff and the unique sounds and the soundscapes. But I just think the songs themselves, there's nothing on Fragile that even comes close to Closer or Hurt, or, March of the Pigs. And it's probably my favorite thing that Flood has ever been a part of. An aggressive, industrial, I don't want to say masterpiece. I'm only giving it 4 stars, but for what it is, it's about as good as it gets. And I don't know, maybe it'll grow on me. It's a tough listen, but it sounds really cool and really unique. And I don't know, Trent Reznor's, like, I want to like their stuff more than I probably do, but it's hard to listen to sometimes. But in pieces, in small amounts, I think this is a really good band with some really cool stuff.
All right, well, there you go. Those are our thoughts on the Nine Inch Nails studio LP discography. They got other tunes that we did not talk about on EPs and other places, but those will have to wait for another time. Probably will have to wait a very long time. But let us know what you think of our rankings, how you rate them, etc., etc. Drop us a comment, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. You can also find us on Patreon, Instagram, Facebook, all those kinds of places in the video description, links down there. Thanks for watching. Make sure you check back. We will be going through our top 10 favorite Nine Inch Nails song in the next video. We will see you there.